that's a competitive win-lose situation with win-lose goals. One party wins, another party loses. And sometimes, Chinese are very shrewd people. And they have a saying that in some cases it's better to lose than to win. If you win, you require a rival who will be dreaming about revenge. But if you lose, this kind of tactical loss could be something which could be helpful for you. Another negative aspect of conflict interaction. Conflict quite often provoke misperception and biases. Another party is perceived as somebody who are very different from us. And sometimes, in conflict interaction, people even will have doubts concerning, are they really humans like we are? Maybe there's something different. And we should not deal with them as humans. And that's how many atrocities which happen on our planet, not just during wartime, but what happens, for example, in Russian prisons just now to thousands and hundreds of thousands of people. Those people who perform all kinds of these cruel activities, pretty often they come for themselves, okay, they are not loyal, they are not patriots. That's why they deserve what happens to them. It will never happen to normal persons like you and me. From my point of view, they are wrong, but that's something that is beyond our today's discussion. Emotionality. Conflicts almost always involve some really strong negative emotions. And there is a tendency for escalation, like, the degree of emotions could be raised over and over and over again. And sometimes it becomes really ugly. Number 4, very important thing. Conflicts pretty often lead to decreased communication. Sometimes to total termination of communication. Probably, at least some of you follow the news and what happened recently because of some actions of Russian government. Sanctions were introduced, and one of the first things which happened, Russian diplomats were sent out of Czech Republic, for example, recently. Well, of course, Putin's government reciprocated, but probably the most important, paramount role for diplomats is to keep channels of communication open. And when something like that happens, of course, it's bad. It's bad for foreign relations. So hopefully, at least, some diplomats will be involved in what's happened currently. A U.S. ambassador was advised to leave Russia and to go to Washington for consultations. Situation is not rosy whatsoever. In fact, probably at the lowest point in Russian-U.S. relations during the last 2 or maybe even 3 decades. The next thing, which makes conflicts problematic, are blood issues. Sometimes it happens that parties who are involved in the conflict, in fact, they are not able to recall and what was the initial reason for conflict to start. It's like in that famous Gogol short novel, как поссорились Иван Иванович с Иван Денисовичем. If you read the piece, one of them called another one a goose, обозвал гусаком. So they had difficulty recalling, but they got engaged in very active and very aggressive conflictual interaction. And that's how it happened pretty often. Nobody remembers why, in the 6th centuries AD, your ancestor did something bad to our ancestors. And that's very dangerous path. Because speaking about what happened in world history, well, some grievances, it's really easy to amass and to provoke continuation of conflictual interaction. The next problem with conflicts. Parties involved in conflict quite often accept and fulfill really rigid commitments, like starting from this point we will never communicate with them because they made something really bad to us, and so on and so on and so on. And this kind of rigid commitments, they quite often really interfere with the efforts to improve situations. That's something which is counterproductive. Something which I already mentioned. In conflict interaction, differences are magnified. We are peaceful people, we are patriots, we are good family persons, we love our kids, we love our families, and they are quite opposite to what I just mentioned. If you start reading propaganda from the other side, it will be exactly the same. They will use pretty similar phrases, pretty similar epithets, pretty similar images to depict somebody who they perceive as their enemies. And the final result of everything which I just mentioned is conflict escalation. Sometimes it starts with something which is quite limited, like, it could be some kind of trade disagreement, and the spiral will go up to the point that sometimes it seems that reconciliation is absolutely impossible. It's either us or them. And that's how wars started in many situations at our planet. In fact, the diagram which you see on your screen now, that's a famous dual concerns model suggested by Rubin and Pruitt. And what it shows that there are 4 major strategies of interaction in conflict situations. What you see in the left corner is yielding, and yielding happens when we have, let's look at the situation from our point of view. So the situation in which we have very low concern related to outcome. We are not really interested in what will happen. So yielding means that we can easily give up some of our positions because it's not important for them, for us. Yeah. Another thing we have on the left side is inaction. If both parties are not interested in conflict interaction, they could choose inaction. Formally, some moves are made, but nothing happens in reality. It looks like a strange situation. Pretty often, it will be changed into something else. If both parties are interested to what will happen in conflict interaction, that's a situation of contending. They will undertake some energetic moves and measures to promote their position. Probably the most desirable outcome sits in the right corner. That's something is called problem solving. Instead of perceiving disagreement as something which could not really be resolved, and thinking that the parties involved are not able to reconcile with one another, in this situation they start working together, finding mutually acceptable solution. Sometimes it's possible. Finally, what you see in the middle is compromising, the search for partial solutions. Rubin and Pruitt, from my point of view, are correct, because what they mentioned, compromising is always a temporary decision. And then it will gravitate to one of the strategic interactions we see in the corners. So once again, that's something I told you. I will just give you some time to read what appears on the slides, because I already commented on different strategies. Okay, and the rest is following. That's it concerning the style of conflict management. We are done with conflicts. Now we'll start distributive bargaining. So, what is characteristic for distributive bargaining situation? First of all, goals of one party are in fundamental, direct conflict to another party. An obvious situation if could be if two countries want to own the same plot of land, the same island, the same territory. They will come up with all kinds of arguments and so on and so on. In business, that's an obvious situation between seller and buyer. Typically, seller are interested to raise the price as high as possible, and buyer is interested to lower the price. They interact with one another, some kind of outcome will happen finally. Another important aspect of distributive bargaining situation. Resources are fixed and limited. It's not possible, to create another island, obliging one of the parties, and the second one will get the same, but, something used to be a matter of disputes. It doesn't work this way in our world. Resources are almost always fixed and limited. If you want to do something, other parties could want to do the same, and sometimes it could lead to contradictions. Or we can try to share limited resources, I already mentioned. And the third aspect is that for both parties involved, maximizing one's own share of resources is the goal. If we can win, it will be good for us if we'll get as much as possible to this kind of situation. But the opposite side of the same consideration, more we will get, more they will be unhappy in this kind of situation. And that's a dilemma which is obvious when we talk about distributive bargaining. So, how we prepare to distributive bargaining? Of course, we would follow some general considerations which we already discussed with you when we spoke about negotiation in general. Collecting all necessary information, doing your homework, learning your opponent, preparing for the situation in question. That's something which is obvious. But beside that, before starting distributive bargaining, we need to establish 4 important points. These are like, values which you need to keep on mind. First of all, let's imagine somebody who decided to buy a new car. First of all, target point. That's something which, for this particular person, could be referred as a reasonable price he or she is willing to pay for a new car. Let's say $10,000. Not a luxury car, but something which is usable, yeah? Then, aspirational point. What could I get if situation will turn to my advantage? That's something which parties involved are dreaming about. Okay, yeah, I could be willing to pay $1,000, speaking from the point of view of the seller for this car. But what really will make me happy, if I'll get the same brand of car and the same model for $2,000 less, if I paid $8,000. Sometimes miracles happen, And for the seller, it could be similar, but just the opposite. Like, I'll be willing to sell this car for a certain amount, let's say $12,000, but if a buyer would be willing to pay $3,000 more, that will be my aspiration point. That's what will make me happy. Besides that, for both parties, a very important thing is walk away and resistance point. If, looking from the point of view of the buyer, the price will go up, at what level I will stop being interested in what is offered for me by the other party. From the point of view of the seller, it's similar, but it's reversed. What's the minimal amount of money I could be willing to accept for this kind of merchandise or service or whatever is the question? And finally, something from which everything starts. It could be asking price for a buyer or initial offer for a seller. What kind of price will be announced in this kind of situation? And something that was mentioned previously when we discussed with you the dilemmas of trust. One of the students asked me a question. Sorry, I don't remember who was that exactly. But it was a good question, like, speaking about negotiations, disclosing information, and that student referred to game theory, is not something which is recommended. Well, yeah, in many situations, it could be a really bad blunder when, for example, asking price or initial offer is revealed prematurely. It could deteriorate bargaining situation. Now let's look at numerical example. As you can see, the upper line is party A is a seller, and the bottom one, party B, is a buyer. So for a seller, for example, once again, it could be a car more expensive compared to what we discussed with you. Asking price could be $33,000. And this asking price would be pretty similar to aspiration point. That's what they would like to get, if it will happen. But in fact, they have also a realistic, and you can call it a fallback position. Their target point is 24. Well, we do understand that, asking $33,000 for this kind of car, it's too much. So probably we'll be willing to sell it for 24. And that will not make us unhappy. And finally, $20,000 is the absolutely minimal price they could agree about. Yeah. Now let's look on the buyer's situation. In fact, buyer's initial offer could be exactly equal to walkaway point for a seller, which makes the situation really dramatic. Yeah. And a buyer could tell, okay, I'm willing to pay $20,000 for that. If a seller is an experienced person, he or she will understand that typically people who are looking for a deal will be willing to modify their position. They would be willing to change their position and their expectations. And looking at the buyer, his target point is 26, which in fact, surprise, surprise, even higher compared to what the seller realistically expects. So when they will start communicating, interacting, exchanging successions, there is a pretty high probability that in fact, a seller could be happier because a seller could pull the price which a buyer is willing to pay up to seller's target point and walk away point. For a buyer, which is somewhat not realistic, it's 30,000. So, you know, if we imagine that situation is following, only one dealer in the city offers this particular brand of car and model of car, and buyer does not have any choice. And for some reason, a buyer really wants to buy exactly this brand of car. He's interested too. So theoretically, he or she could be willing even to pay 30,000. The most important conclusion which we need to make, considering the situation, that's a situation of positive bargaining range. Why? Because walk away point for a seller is lower than walk away point for a buyer. They have a diapason in which they could bargain and hopefully reach some kind of mutual agreement on this matter. Now, the next example, as you can see, is an example of negative bargaining range. It happens in reality too. Two parties, more parties start negotiation, and they can figure out that, in fact, buyer is not willing to pay the price which will be equal or higher than seller's walkaway point. And that's exactly the situation which you can see. In this particular case, initial offer from the buyer, by the way, now it's not realistic. Probably we need to put one more zero, so let's make it 8,000 probably. You know, I wasn't attentive typing it. It should be 8,000 and 12,000. But it's lower. No, sorry. I have an extra zero for walkaway point for. Okay, let me correct it. It will look ridiculous. Just a second, guys. Happens sometimes. Sorry for being inattentive. So, yeah. Now it became much more realistic. Just a second. And I will come back with my presentation. Okay. Yeah. Now it's realistic. Now it's good. But anyway, what was important for us? As you can see, walk away point for a buyer is $500 less than walk away point for a seller. And the situation is impossible for them to reach a mutually acceptable agreement. When we speak about bargaining concerning, you know, some kind of matters, we just cost about well, $1,000, $2,500. It's not a huge drama, but imagine negotiations between two big companies, and the price for a deal could be millions of dollars. And how could they learn in advance if they have a positive and negative diapason of bargaining? And that's something that's very essential. And in real world, for this purpose, they will definitely involve a third party. For example, it could be certified auditors in some case, and lawyers, a team of auditors and lawyers who will study the documents submitted by seller and buyer, and they could confirm, okay, guys, you have this positive bargaining range. You can agree on these matters, or they can conclude that there is no positive bargaining range, and it will be impossible for the parties involved to strike a deal. So they should better look for somebody else. Another point which is very important when we speak about distributive bargaining. what really makes a party strong. Of course, the amount of resources which they have is very important, very essential. Big company can survive, in some circumstances in which a small company will disappear. The same relates to countries. Sometimes big countries, can really impose their will on the smaller countries, which is not good from moral point of view, but happens. Still, the most important factor which makes your position strong during negotiations are alternatives which you have. Imagine that 2 years passed. Well, yeah, a little bit more, but never mind. 2 years have passed. You got your BA diploma, and some of them could decide that it's time for you to start working. So you have interview with different prospective employees and compare two cases. The first case is somebody who already had several interviews and got 2 job offers. And another person also had several interviews but haven't got any offers. Whose position is stronger? A trivial question, of course, the position of the first guy, which could provide the first guy some opportunities. For example, imagine that during the interview number 6, the first guy likes everything in the company of question, but is dissatisfied with the salary which was suggested. Having other 2 offers in the pocket, this person can say, okay, guys, I like, your company, I like what you suggested me, but I'm not satisfied with the salary. And I already got 2 offers, and they offered me a higher salary than you. Maybe you can adjust your position, and I'm willing to renegotiate with you our situation. A second person who does not have any alternative could not play this card, apparently, because, if the company who is willing to hire her or him, but for lower salary, they could reconsider and decide not to hire this person. So this person has to keep a low profile. If alternatives are attractive, negotiators can set their goals higher. I can shoot for the stars because I already have something in my pocket. Yeah. They could make fewer concessions. With all due respect, I'm not willing to make this concession to you because I have other offers. If there are no attractive alternatives, apparently negotiations will have less bargaining power. And something to look for, something to consider all the time, is called BATNA. That's an acronym. BATNA means Best Alternative to Negotiated Agreement. Always look for your BATNA. Don't miss a situation in which it could be better to switch to your BATNA instead of continuing negotiations, which are unsuccessful, which don't promise much for you. So BATNA is absolutely essential. BATNA is very important. And that's something is depicted on the graph, which you see. Yeah. As you can see, a buyer has an alternative which is better than walkaway point, which means that probably it will make sense for a buyer not to negotiate up to walkaway point, but leave earlier because alternative is better. And the same could be applied for a seller. So don't forget your BATNA. Always think about your alternatives. Not please, try not to be involved in negotiations so that you are unable to terminate negotiations. Sometimes it really makes sense. What are fundamental strategies when we are talking about distribution bargaining? First of all, parties involved typically push for settlement near opponent's resistance point. And that is why, if you have any way to learn information concerning your opponent's resistance point, walkaway point, of course, it makes sense to use this information. Yeah, they pretend that they do not have money to agree with our price, but if you know that we could push them higher, we'll definitely do it. It happened historically. Following the World War I, there were very important negotiations concerning sizes of navies, military fleets in Pacific. Fortunately for United Kingdom and US, and unfortunately for Japan, US and UK were able to decipher codes which Japanese used to negotiate with their government. They learned what would be a minimal acceptable figures for negotiations. If I remember correctly, Japan ultimately could agree to have 50% of the Navy, which UK and US will have. And UK and US, using a combination of all kinds of strategy, pushed down Japan exactly to this number. Well, later Japan reconsidered their position, as you know, and unfortunately World War II had started, but for a while it worked. Another thing is getting the other party to change their resistance point. They could reconsider in some kind of situation. If settlement rate is negative, either get the other side to change their resistance point, look at the quality of the products and services we are offering you. That's the only offer on the market of the same quality and the same range, for example. Or you can modify your own resistance point. You can start seeing some advantages, in the products and services which you initially plan to not to accept. And another strategy is an attempt to convince the other party that the settlement is the best possible. That's what some companies do. They're offering the price, and there is a note. If you will be able to find a better price, a lower price on the market, we'll be willing to accept it if your providers approve. And in some situations, it really works. But typically, companies, they have this information concerning what is offered on the market, and they go along with this kind of information. Keys to implementing any of the four strategies are discovering the other party's resistance point and influencing the other party's resistance point. How you discover it? Well, in the course of negotiations, considering what kind of concessions they are willing to make, how they behave, what are patterns of their behavior, you can guess about this kind of information. Or sometimes you can use other sources. A technical task of negotiators. Assess outcome values and the cost of termination for the other party. If you are really interested in this particular negotiation and they can easily terminate and switch to another one, you definitely need to be very careful. Yeah, you should try to manage the other party's impressions. We are a reliable company with a great reputation. We offer the best solutions. We offer customized solution, and so on and so on and so on. You know the spiel, you know the game. Yep. You can try to modify the other party's perceptions and facts. During the previous stage of our negotiations, I noted that you are wrong when you put some doubts on how durable are our goods. We performed some extra tests, and now we can prove that your initial position was incorrect. Please consider new information coming, yeah? And you can manipulate the actual cost of delay or termination. In fact, time is always a very important consideration when we deal with negotiations. Why? Because typically parties involved could be in different situations. For example, one of the parties could be really interested in striking the deal as soon as possible because they're selling something exactly because they urgently need some money to invest into some affairs or to pay their debts or whatever. And another party could be much less interested in quick conclusion of negotiations. And of course, you know, this party could really use for their advantage this kind of situation. How could you assess outcome values and cost of termination? Sometimes you do it indirectly, which I mentioned. Determine what kind of information opponents use to set their target point and resistance points. But sometimes you will be surprised it could happen directly. You could just ask. And in some cases, your opponents could be willing, you know, to inform you of what kind of consideration they use. They could refer, for example, to the generally accepted expectations and principles at the particular market, or they can refer to something else. Asking questions typically is good. They can choose either to answer or not, but not asking questions is much worse compared to asking questions. Of course, for managing other parties' impression, you need to screen your behavior. And a kind of golden rule is not to disclose any information prematurely. Say and do as little as possible. Wait until they will disclose some information for you. Direct actions to alter impressions could be presenting facts that enhance your position. That's something which I already discussed with you. Modifying the other party's perception. You can make some outcomes appear less attractive. Let me tell you what will happen to you if you would refuse to buy this new equipment from my company. I know this information is close for you that your competitors already made this decision and they made prepayment. So you will be kicked out from this market if you will be unwilling to spend on new equipment we are offering you. Make the cost of obtaining goals appear higher. Well, you know, we really invested a lot of efforts into customizing our equipment for you, and we can present some proof of that. And finally, make demands and positions appear more or less attractive to the other party, whichever suits your needs. That's how it works. And we'll consider some examples with you later when we speak about tactics of distributive negotiation bargaining. How we can manipulate the actual cost of delay termination. Well, sometimes people plan some disruptive actions, and that will raise the cost of delays to other parties. I'm not referring to something criminal. Sometimes just, you know, waiting for some more time could dramatically change situation. Yeah. Another thing you can do, you can form an alliance with outsiders. Look who support us. Look what kind of allies we have. It can change perception dramatically. And you can schedule manipulations. One party, that's once again time factor, is usually more vulnerable to delay than the other. And that's something which could be used. So, opening offer. Where will you start? A kind of common wisdom is, if you make a low opening offer being a buyer, you have more bargaining range, and typically you will get a better price. And if you make it high, being a seller, the same logic applies. But there is some danger you need to consider. If you will make offer which is too high or too low, it could offend your opponent, in fact. What, for this kind of property, you ask me to pay $2 million, I have alternatives, and I will not be dealing with you, like, you are somebody who's out of sync. I'm leaving this negotiation. So be careful, don't overdo it, yeah? Then you can decide of what kind of negotiation style you would choose, competitive or moderate. In some cases, it really makes sense to put a lot of pressure on your opponent, especially if you've got an information that the opponent, the other party, has a tendency to bend under pressure and to oblige whoever is putting pressure on them. In some other cases, it's much better to use a moderate style of negotiations. Be patient, respectful, and you continue this list. Initial concessions, should any to be made? If so, how large? Once again, a general expectation is that concessions should be leveled for what other parties suggest to you. And typically it works like, my concession for your concession. If you make concessions too early or too much of them, in fact, it could have a negative effect because your opponent could start thinking why they wanted so much. Maybe they have some other considerations we need to figure out and take into account. It could complicate negotiations. For example, by the way, it's one of the typical problems which happens when Americans negotiate with people belonging to Oriental culture. One of the Americans company who sold equipment for oil industry failed to strike a very lucrative contract in India exactly because they rushed too much. They were too eager to sign up of an agreement. And from point of view of Oriental cultures, it could be suspicious. Why they are so Russian? Maybe they have some considerations we need to figure out. The role of concessions. Without them, there is either capitulation or deadlock. Concessions are absolutely necessary. And pattern of concession making, as I already mentioned, contains valuable information. If they are willing to make concessions more often than we, probably they are more interested. And this means that we could put even more pressure on them, yeah? And typically, at a certain point, one party or both of them will reach the point. It should be probably something close to their walk-away point, a distant point, when they will make a commitment. This is all I can do for you. Either you'll choose to buy this $500, for what I'm offering you, or you can leave because that's the lowest price which I can suggest to you. Tactical considerations for commitments. So, speaking about commitment are very important. For example, a commitment could be something that is related to the quantity of products. As the minimal batch of our products which we are willing to sell is 200 units, no less. Those of you who have some experience, buying something, probably know about that. It could be related to time. It could be related to procedures. For example, who will take delivery and who will pay for delivery. So commitments typically have three properties. Finality. If that's really a commitment, that's something which you are not willing to change. Specificity. Commitment should be very specific. That's one thing to say that, if we will not conclude our negotiations during the next year, I will break out from negotiations. Another thing to mention specifically, I expect us to get a successful conclusion of our deals by April 25th. After that period, I will come out of negotiations. And consequences. What will be the consequences for the other party after you will accept some kind of commitment? And sometimes you announce it explicitly, like, if you want to reach an agreement up to a certain date, I will terminate negotiations. Important skill is preventing other party from committing prematurely. Exactly because three properties of commitment we have already mentioned. If the other party establish some commitment, and if they will decide to change their position, typically they risk to lose their fate, to spoil their reputation. The people are not willing doing that. So commitment is very efficient, widely used tool in negotiations, but we should be careful of making commitments because commitments definitely reduce your flexibility. If you already know that you won't be willing to continue negotiations past April 25th, you cannot reconsider. And what if some important events will happen? Tactical considerations. You should always consider how to abandon a committed position. You need to get a plan to way out. It was something funny which I read about in one book of negotiations. These were difficult negotiations between trade unions and employers. And the representative of trade union, he made a commitment to the final date. But when they were approaching this final date and time, it was obvious that just last efforts are needed to strike a deal which will be attractive for both trade union and lawyers. And that guy said, like he made a commitment, which was quite dramatic. If negotiations will, if agreement will not be concluded before a certain date, I will rather kill myself than continue negotiations. So sometimes humor can save a situation. What he did, he disappeared for a couple of minutes, then he came again. He put a napkin with some ketchup spots. And he said, well, guys, I wanted to keep my commitment. I tried to kill myself. I missed. I just have a minor scratch, and now I'm willing to continue negotiations. Sometimes something like that could work. Not all the time, of course. Sometimes, what could help you to resolve the situation is letting commitment die silently. You just continue negotiating. All the it's already exceeded the time limit which you have established. And sometimes your partners will behave the same way, like, they will pretend that they haven't noticed. You can restate the commitment in more general terms. We didn't mean a particular item or particular route or whatever. And finally, you can minimize the damage to the relationship if the other backs off. So we really need to be flexible, even if we made some commitments. How you close the deal. And now what I would like you to do, guys, I will publish the link for 5 minutes talk related to advisors how to conclude a deal in our chat. So please listen to this talk. That's a good one. And come back in 5 minutes, okay? Let me do it. Yeah, that's a link. So please, guy, see the video, come back, and we'll discuss this conclusion part, okay? So I expect you back at 57 minutes.
Dr. Lissovsky, excuse me, we can't hear you.
I forgot to turn on the sounds. I'm really sorry. Sometimes it happens. My fault. And thank you for letting me know. So we are talking about Gerard Nirenberg. He used to be an American lawyer, and he introduced two classes of strategies. Let me make sure. Yeah, now you can hear me. Sorry again, guys. It's so awkward on my part. So the first tactic related to expert use of time is forbearance, waiting in the haze. It could be used in circumstances in which your primary urge would be to do something which is quite opposite to that. Because the reverse of forbearance is the rash act. The example which Nirenberg provides is following. Quakers, that's a religious sect, and by the way, they were used for a famous brand of oatmeal, Quakers Oats. In fact, what they do, and that could be a problem, they make decisions using a method of consensus. Everybody in community should agree to a certain decision. And you can understand how complicated is that. So if you get some kind of disagreement, what they use is something they call a period of silence. They agree to stop discussing disagreement for a while. There are several reasons for doing something like that. First of all, emotions will be attenuated. They will become less hot when time passes. That's one consideration. Other considerations, despite this agreement not to discuss it any longer, in fact, at the backstage, parties involved will continue discussing their disagreements, but it will be much less agitated compared to what happens during the public meetings. And forbearance thus avoids a direct conflict and eventually achieves a settlement. Forbearance, patience, is very essential quality. And let me quote Benjamin Disraeli, outstanding British diplomat for you, who said, next to knowing when to seize an advantage, the most important thing in life is to know when to forgo an advantage. Don't push too hard. Don't force your opponent into unconditional surrender. That's not a good strategy. Another strategy related to time and timing, surprise. This strategy involves sudden shift in method, argument, or approach. For example, you use a really patient, leveled, polite manner of communication, but sometimes it could be helpful at a certain point in time to explode. Especially when it looks like, you already discussed all essential issues, but for some reason your opponents, the other party, are dragging their food. You can explode, and it would work. Another strategy, by the way, which Chinese love to use, is following. After a long period of negotiations, they unexpectedly change the team or principal members of the team. This surprise could be for their advantage because, the opponents will not know what to do and how to react for new persons which appeared on the stage. It could help to buy some time, and it could change what was done. The next example of one strategy is fait accompli. Sometimes one of the parties just choose to go ahead and to start acting before negotiations could be concluded. It's risky, but sometimes it's work. You act to achieve your goal, and it could be accepted, but in some cases it could be rejected. Once again, a very good historical example, which you see on the slide. In 1956, Egypt nationalized Suez Channel. And you remember that Suez Canal. And you remember that recently there was a very difficult situation when one of the ships stuck in the middle of Suez Canal. It required 2 weeks to resolve the situation. So when the Egyptian government did it, it was fait accompli one. In fact, the canal belonged to English and French investors, and England and France, United Kingdom and France, were absolutely unhappy, and they also decided to use the same kind of strategy. And that was second fait accompli. They sent their troops into Canal Zone. They counted for the support from the part of the US, the most powerful country at that time already. But Americans, considering the kind of trends which happened in the world, more and more countries who used to be colonies before that started liberating. The climax was 1961, when more than 40 countries in Africa became independent. Egypt was among the first ones. They did not support French and British and Israelis. And they had to accept what Egypt did. So Egyptian fait accompli appeared to be successful. British, Israeli, and French appeared to be a failure. The next strategy, something is called blunt withdrawal. Who? Me. It's widely used by politicians. Somebody who is caught red-handed will totally say, who? Me? No, I did nothing. Of course, speaking about our politics, наши знаменитые их там неты, it could be an obvious example. In fact, Putin is uses this strategy really often. And typically, it should be some excuses like, I don't know about volunteers, but speaking about our military troops, they are not involved whatsoever. I don't know how tanks and other military equipment appeared in certain regions. Maybe they were bought at supermarket, and so on and so on and so on. More sophisticated strategy, which is used, tactics which is used in negotiations. Apparent withdrawal. The man who wasn't there. What Nirenberg provides as an example, he refers to the experience of one of the US lawyers who was a defendant in one of the trials and was absolutely dissatisfied with judge's decision to schedule negotiations at the time when he was not able to be present. So he made a démarche. He publicly announced that he completely refuses to continue his participation in this trial because his opinion is not taken into account, and he will not have enough time to prepare for the trial. But just in case, he instructed his associates to be present at the court hearings and to act as his substitute if the judge will decide to go as the judge planned initially. Fortunately for the person involved, judge bent under pressure, he considered his decision, and the hearings were postponed. And that's how it works. Reversal. You can go forward, you can turn backward. Using this strategy, you act in opposition to what may be considered to be the popular trend or goal. In fact, speaking about financial activities, sometimes exactly those people, pardon me, who invest and buy shares counter-trend appear to be the winners, and the majorities who follow a trend could be the losers. So this means that, in fact, you should buy when everyone has pessimistic attitude, was pessimistic attitude, has pessimistic attitudes, and sell when everybody is optimistic. That would be a good strategy. Example of the reversal, which you see on the screen. That's also from Nuremberg book. One of the U.S. senators from the Democratic Party, who was elected in Brooklyn, encountered with a situation in which he decided not to support the American Labor Party. What he did, when they did with him, he promoted his own candidate at the local elections of this party, put some pressure on them. And two parties involved agreed, and they got a solution. Another examples of one strategy, two last ones for today, limits. This is absolute length and time limits. That's one example. Another example could be one session, one issue. We will not agree to discuss multiple issues during one session. Or agreement not to touch certain issues. Like, speaking about Soviet time experience of Soviet diplomats, typically they refused to discuss, with few exceptions, one is what happened and what was made in the name of Helsinki Agreement, and issues related to civil rights. And it could be silent barter, no communication and no talk on certain issues. Why we have these mushrooms? Of course, Russian word for them on the slide is gruzdi. English name is milk caps. Latin name is on the slide too, Lacterius resimus. You can see it. That's happened to one of their friends of mine. He was very passionate concerning collecting mushrooms, as I am. But at the place where his mother-in-law dacha was located, he had brought a lot of different kinds of mushrooms, but gruzdi was something which he missed. Of course, asking locals, it's something which is useful because typically people who are mushroom fans, they do not disclose information concerning the places where they grow. But one day he used a very clever negotiation strategy. He woke up early, really early, before everybody went to the forest, and that was a season for gruzdi, for milk caps. So he left early, and then he turned into opposite direction and pretended that he already coming home with his baskets full of mushrooms, and that worked. One of the persons who was walking the same direction asked him, okay, I will say it in Russia, ну что, ты грузди-то там вот на горушке собрал, и показал рукой в том направлении, в котором эти грибы росли. So that acquaintance of mine was very happy. He learned what to do. He waited until, he parted with these guys. He went to that hill, and after that, he knew where to look for these particular mushrooms. Another example of this strategy, which is feinting, look to the right, go to the left, is something which is related to Zhirinovsky. In fact, what Mr. Putin and his socialists do all the time, they use Zhirinovsky for declaring and disclosing information which is perceived as unreliable because everybody knows who Zhirinovsky is. But that's paradoxical. Many of the initiatives Zhirinovsky come with later are implemented by the government. They use him as some kind of, test tool to measure and to gauge public reaction and public opinion. And guys, I think that I will stop at this point. That will do for today. If you have any questions or any suggestions, I'll be happy to answer you. If not, that will be the end for our today's meetings. Thank you very much, everybody who attended. So I will meet with the second group in half an hour. And with the other groups, well, we will meet in 2 weeks from now. So thank you. Bye, guys.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Goodbye.